At a grand mansion perched on a hill, a lively pool party was in full swing. The evening sun cast a warm golden glow over the pool, making the water shimmer like diamonds. Guests were scattered around, laughing, sipping drinks, and chatting in small groups. The place was filled with luxury, gleaming furniture, expensive decorations, and the hum of music drifting through the air. In the midst of all this, a young man moved quietly, his eyes focused on his tasks. His name was Marcus, and he was one of the waiters hired to serve the guests that evening. Marcus had always been a professional. He wore a crisp black suit, his white shirt spotless, and his tie neatly fastened. Though he was used to working events like this, he couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. The wealth and extravagance surrounding him were a stark contrast to his humble upbringing. But Marcus knew the drill. He had learned to keep his head down, to do his job well, and to avoid drawing attention to himself. His job was simple: serve drinks, refill plates, and keep the guests happy. As he moved through the crowd, Marcus tried his best to blend in, offering a polite smile to everyone he passed. Some of the guests nodded at him, acknowledging his presence. Others didn't seem to notice him at all. It wasn't the first time he'd experienced this, and he had learned to accept it. After all, he was just a waiter, someone who was there to do his job and leave as quietly as he came. Despite his efforts to stay unnoticed, a group of guests sitting by the pool had other ideas. They were loud and boisterous, laughing a little too loudly and making exaggerated gestures with their drinks. They looked at Marcus as he walked past, and their conversation paused for a moment. One of them, a young man with a confident smile, nudged his friends and pointed at Marcus. "Hey, look at this guy," the young man said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. The others turned to look, some smirking while others raised an eyebrow. "What's he doing here? Shouldn't he be serving drinks somewhere else?" Marcus kept his eyes down, continuing to walk toward the table where drinks were needed. He had heard comments like these before. Nothing too harsh, just a little joke at his expense. He tried not to let it bother him, but it stung just the same. As he set the tray of drinks down on the table, he felt the eyes of the group on him. One of the women in the group, a well-dressed woman with a sharp smile, made a mock curtsy as he placed the drinks down. "Well, thank you, good sir," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Would you like a tip for your hard work?" The others laughed, their laughter echoing across the pool. It wasn't the first time Marcus had been treated like this, but it still hurt. He had never been the kind of person to cause a scene or stand up for himself. His job was to serve, not to draw attention. So he smiled politely and stepped back, trying to ignore the discomfort building inside him. The group continued their jokes, louder now, and Marcus kept moving, trying his best to avoid their gaze. But deep down, he knew they were enjoying his discomfort. He couldn't help but feel like he didn't belong there, surrounded by people who saw him as nothing more than a servant. Still, he held his head high and carried on with his work, hoping the night would pass quickly and he could leave the party behind without any more trouble. Little did he know, things were about to change in a way he never expected. The evening continued, and the laughter from the poolside group grew louder. Marcus, now back with a fresh tray of drinks, tried his best to ignore the cruel jokes. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let these people distract him. But the air around him felt tense, as if something was about to happen. He could feel the eyes of the group on him as he passed them again, and it made him nervous. As he approached the pool area once more, he heard the same young man with a confident smile call out to him. "Hey, waiter," the young man yelled, his voice filled with mischief. "Can you give us a hand with something?" Marcus turned toward the group, hesitating for just a moment. He had seen the look in their eyes, the kind that meant trouble, but he knew he couldn't ignore them. They were paying customers, and he needed to do his job. "Of course," Marcus replied, keeping his tone polite, though his nerves were starting to show. The young man grinned, his eyes glinting with excitement. He motioned to the edge of the pool, where a few others in the group were lounging. "Come here for a second," he said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "We've got a little challenge for you." Marcus didn't know what to expect, but he was already preparing himself for something he wouldn't like. As he walked toward the group, one of the women raised her glass and laughed. "You're not afraid of water, are you?" she asked in a mocking tone. Before Marcus could respond, the young man stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward Marcus' shoulder. In one swift motion, the young man shoved Marcus hard. The force caught Marcus off guard, and before he could steady himself, he found himself tumbling backward. The cold shock of the pool water hit him all at once, and for a brief moment, he struggled to catch his breath. He flailed for a second, feeling the weight of his wet clothes pulling him down, but instinct kicked in. He kicked his legs and broke the surface of the water, gasping for air. The group erupted into laughter, their voices echoing over the sound of the splashing water. Marcus climbed out of the pool, dripping wet and humiliated. He wiped the water from his face and looked up, his eyes meeting the mocking gazes of the group. The young man who had pushed him into the pool was laughing the hardest, slapping his knee as he pointed at Marcus. "Oh man, that was priceless," the young man said between laughs. "You should have seen your face." The others joined in, their laughter ringing in Marcus' ears. He felt his heart race, a mixture of anger and embarrassment flooding his chest. He had been humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers, and it stung more than he cared to admit. But even as the laughter continued, Marcus kept his composure. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing him upset. He straightened himself, wiping off his suit as best as he could, and took a deep breath. He wasn't going to let this break him. He had learned to stay calm in moments like this, to not show how deeply their words and actions affected him. As he turned to walk away, he caught the smirk of the woman who had spoken to him earlier. "You should be careful around here," she called out, still laughing. Not everyone has a sense of humor. Marcus didn't respond. He simply walked away, the sound of their laughter still ringing in his ears. He had been a part of their joke, but he refused to let them see him falter. Inside, however, he couldn't help but feel the sting of their cruelty. He had always believed that people should treat one another with respect, but in moments like these, he was reminded that some people never learn that lesson. Little did he know, the evening was far from over, and things were about to take an unexpected turn. Marcus walked away from the pool, feeling the cold water dripping down his clothes, but he kept his head high. His heart was still racing, and his mind was spinning with a mix of emotions. Anger, frustration, and embarrassment filled him, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and push those feelings aside. This wasn't the time for a scene. He had learned early on in his life that the best way to survive in places like this was to keep his composure no matter what. He moved toward the back of the mansion, hoping to find a quiet spot to collect himself. The laughter from the group still echoed in his mind, but he knew he couldn't let it affect him too much. He had been through worse in his life. This was just another test of his patience. As he turned the corner near the kitchen, he noticed a few other waiters moving about, carrying trays of food and drinks. They didn't seem to pay much attention to him, which was fine with Marcus. He didn't want anyone to ask if he was okay. He just needed a moment to breathe, to shake off the weight of the situation. He took a seat on a nearby bench, pressing his hands into his knees as he exhaled slowly. Just as he was about to stand up and get back to work, he heard footsteps approaching. Marcus looked up, expecting to see one of the guests or perhaps another staff member, but it wasn't any of them. Instead, a man in a sharp suit walked around the corner. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, but there was a certain confidence about him, an air of authority that was unmistakable. The man paused when he saw Marcus sitting on the bench, and for a moment their eyes met. The man's gaze was calm and observant, as if he were studying Marcus without judgment. For a second, Marcus wondered if the man had seen what had happened by the pool. But the man didn't seem concerned about that at all. "Everything okay?" the man asked, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of genuine interest. Marcus hesitated, not used to being asked about his well-being, especially by someone who didn't know him. But something in the man's tone made Marcus feel like it wasn't just a casual question. It felt like the kind of question someone asks when they actually care. "I'm fine," Marcus said, standing up quickly. Just a little wet. No big deal." The man nodded slowly, clearly not convinced. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Marcus. "You don't have to pretend. I've been around long enough to know when someone's been put through something they didn't deserve." Marcus felt a rush of gratitude toward the man, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was just the fact that someone had noticed him, had acknowledged the way he was feeling. It was rare for anyone to do that in this world of high society. The man's presence was calm, and something about him made Marcus feel a bit at ease. "Come with me," the man said, gesturing toward the hallway leading back into the mansion. "I want to talk to you for a moment." Marcus was a little surprised. Most people in this world didn't offer help to someone like him, especially after a situation like the one he'd just gone through. But something about this man made Marcus trust him. He followed him into the house, unsure of what to expect next. As they walked down the hallway, the man glanced over at Marcus and gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't let people like that get to you," he said quietly. "There's always more to a person than what meets the eye. And sometimes, the ones who think they have power are the ones who are the least worth your time." Marcus didn't know who this man was, but his words struck a chord. They reminded him of what he had always believed, that kindness and respect mattered more than wealth or status. It felt like a small glimmer of hope in a world that often seems so unfair. Marcus followed the man through the hallways of the mansion, feeling a mix of curiosity and confusion. The grand rooms around him were decorated with expensive art and pristine furniture. Everything seemed to be designed to impress. But to Marcus, it all felt a little distant, like it was a world he couldn't quite touch. The man, however, moved with an ease that suggested he belonged here. He was confident, but not in the way of someone trying to show off. It was the kind of confidence that came from knowing who you were and not needing anyone else's approval. As they passed through the elegant corridors, Marcus couldn't help but glance around. He had worked in enough mansions to know the kinds of people who lived in places like this. The wealthy, the powerful. He had never felt entirely at home in these spaces, but tonight, something about this man made him feel less like an outsider. It was strange, but it was also a feeling he wasn't used to, a feeling of being seen. Finally, they reached a small sitting room with large windows that overlooked the garden. The man gestured toward one of the chairs near a low table and offered Marcus a seat. As Marcus sat down, the man took a seat opposite him, his gaze never leaving him for long. "I saw what happened outside," the man said, his voice calm and thoughtful. "And I have to say, I don't like what I witnessed." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, not sure how to respond. He hadn't expected anyone, especially someone as important-looking as this man, to acknowledge what had happened. Most people wouldn't have cared, but this man seemed different. There was a sincerity in his voice that made Marcus feel heard, like he wasn't just another face in the crowd. "Don't worry about them," the man continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Some people think their money and status give them the right to treat others however they want. But they're wrong." Marcus listened quietly. There was something about the way the man spoke that made him feel like he wasn't just being comforted for the sake of politeness. His words felt like they were meant to lift him up, not just brush off the situation. The weight that had been pressing on Marcus' chest started to feel a little lighter. "You've got something they don't," the man said, leaning forward slightly. "They think they're better than you because of their wealth. But wealth doesn't define a person's worth. It's character, integrity, and how you treat others that matter in the end." Marcus felt a small spark of hope in his chest. It was a message he hadn't heard often in his life, especially in the circles he worked in. He had learned over the years to keep his head down and focus on his work, but hearing these words made him wonder if there was more to life than just getting by. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," the man said with a slight chuckle. "Maybe it's because I've seen too many people like them, people who don't understand what really matters." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment, absorbing the weight of the man's words. He had always known that there was more to life than wealth or power, but hearing someone else voice it made it feel more real, more tangible. It was as if the man had opened a door to a new way of thinking, a way of thinking that could help him rise above the narrow view that so many people had. The man's smile softened, and he gave Marcus a knowing look. "You've got potential," he said. "I can tell. And I think you're better than any of those people out there." Marcus was surprised by the statement. He wasn't used to receiving compliments from people like this, especially from someone who seemed to have everything. It made him wonder if the man truly saw something in him that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just the words that made a difference, though. It was the way the man spoke to him, like he mattered, like he had value beyond his job. Before Marcus could respond, the man stood up and walked over to a nearby desk, where he pulled out a business card. He handed it to Marcus with a steady hand, his eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "I know a few people who can help you," the man said. "If you're interested, give me a call. You deserve more than just being a waiter. You deserve a chance." Marcus stared at the card in his hand, still processing everything that had just happened. He hadn't expected this turn of events, but something inside him told him that this was more than just a chance encounter. It was an opportunity, one that could change everything for him. The man gave him a small nod and a smile, as if to say he had done his part. Then, without saying much more, he turned and left the room, leaving Marcus to sit there, still holding the business card. For the first time that night, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be different. Marcus sat alone in the small sitting room, the business card still in his hand. It was a simple card, not flashy, but there was something about it that felt important. He turned it over in his fingers, staring at the name printed on the front. The man had been so confident, so sure of himself, and that confidence had made Marcus feel like maybe he wasn't just another waiter. Maybe he was someone who could do something more. The words from their conversation echoed in his mind. "You deserve more than just being a waiter," the man had said. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way they made Marcus feel. For the first time, someone had recognized him as more than his job. It was strange, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For a brief moment, Marcus let himself imagine what life could be like if things were different. What if he didn't have to work at parties like these, standing behind trays and making sure people's drinks were full? What if he could do something bigger, something that actually mattered to him? The idea was overwhelming. He had never considered the possibility of moving beyond the life he had known. It wasn't that he didn't dream. He just didn't think dreams like that were meant for people like him. He had always believed that he was just one of many, just another person trying to make a living in a world that didn't seem to care. But this stranger, this man with the quiet authority, had made him see that maybe he was wrong. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vast garden below. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the water, and for a moment, he felt like he was seeing everything from a different perspective. It wasn't just a garden. It was a symbol of something bigger, something out of reach, but not impossible. Maybe, just maybe, it was a glimpse of the life he could have if he dared to take the first step. He glanced down at the business card again, the name printed on it clear in his mind. The man had offered him more than just a chance to get out of serving drinks. He had offered him an opportunity to do something meaningful. Marcus wasn't sure how this could all play out, but he knew that for the first time, he had a choice. He didn't have to stay stuck in the life he had always known. It was a terrifying thought, to be honest. What if he failed? What if he wasn't good enough for whatever the man had in mind? What if he wasn't cut out for something more? All of those fears rushed in, but Marcus forced himself to breathe and push them aside. He wasn't the type to let fear control him. If he had learned anything from his years of working in places like this, it was that change didn't come without risk. He had spent too many years hiding behind the safety of his routine, telling himself that the way things were was enough. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. With a deep breath, Marcus made his decision. He wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to take the chance. The man had believed in him, and that was enough to give him the courage to believe in himself too. That night, after his shift ended, Marcus pulled out his phone. His fingers hesitated over the number on the card. It was one thing to hold onto a dream and another to act on it. But as his finger dialed the number, he felt a sense of purpose growing within him. This was it, the moment where things could start to change. The phone rang for a few seconds before the man's calm voice answered. "Hello." Marcus cleared his throat. "Hi, this is Marcus. I wanted to talk about the opportunity you mentioned earlier." There was a pause on the other end, and then the man spoke again, this time with a tone of approval. "I'm glad to hear from you. Let's talk." As they began to discuss the next steps, Marcus felt a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something more than he had ever had before. For the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could leave behind the life that had always kept him in the shadows. The call ended, and Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the phone in his hand. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was the beginning of something new. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there were no promises. But for the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he had a real chance to make something of himself, to rise above the expectations that had been set for him. And that, he knew, was worth fighting for. The days that followed were a blur of excitement and uncertainty. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, but he wasn't sure what. After that phone call, the man had told him to meet him at a small office downtown. The details were vague, but Marcus had agreed without hesitation. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. He found himself pacing around his small apartment that morning, his heart racing with anticipation. He had always been a little nervous about stepping into the unknown, but this was different. This time, he felt like he had a purpose. The business card still sat on his kitchen counter, a reminder of the opportunity that had been handed to him. His hand shook slightly as he grabbed his coat and headed out the door. The office building wasn't far from where he lived, but it felt like a world away. As he entered the lobby, the polished marble floors and sleek design of the building made him feel small, out of place. But he pushed aside those feelings and headed up to the floor where the man's office was located. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped out into a quiet hallway. The walls were adorned with modern art, and there was a sense of calm in the air. It was hard to ignore how different this environment was from the chaotic, noisy world of parties and mansion halls he was used to. This was professional, controlled, and orderly. It felt like the kind of place where important decisions were made, where people like him had a chance to step up and prove themselves. As he walked toward the office door, Marcus could hear voices from inside. One of them was the man he had spoken to on the phone, but the other voice was unfamiliar. It was calm, measured, and authoritative. He knocked lightly on the door and waited for a response. "Come in," came the voice from inside. Marcus opened the door, stepping inside to find the man sitting at a large desk, speaking with a woman who appeared to be in her mid-40s. She was dressed in a sharp suit, her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, and her posture exuded confidence. The man looked up and smiled warmly, standing up to greet Marcus. "Ah, Marcus, glad you could make it," he said, his tone friendly yet professional. "Thank you for having me," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of the situation settling in. This wasn't just a casual meeting. It was a chance to prove himself. The woman nodded at him, but didn't say anything right away. She seemed to be assessing him, her eyes sharp as they studied him from across the room. Marcus could feel the weight of her gaze, but he held his ground, trying to keep his nerves at bay. "Marcus, this is Sarah," the man said, gesturing to the woman. She's the one who can help you get where you need to go. Sarah extended a hand to Marcus, her grip firm but not overpowering. Nice to meet you, she said, her voice calm and businesslike. We've been discussing your potential, and I think you have what it takes to move up. But it won't be easy. You'll need to prove yourself. Marcus swallowed hard, his stomach twisting with a mixture of excitement and fear. This wasn't just about serving drinks at a party anymore. This was about real opportunities, real change. He nodded, trying to stay calm. I understand, he said quietly. I'm ready. The man smiled, nodding approvingly. Good. Let's start with the basics. We want to see how well you can think on your feet, how quickly you can adapt to different situations. That's the kind of skill we need here. Sarah and I work with a lot of high-level clients, and we don't just hire anyone. It's about how you handle pressure, how you present yourself when things aren't going as planned. Marcus listened carefully, taking in every word. He knew this wasn't going to be a walk in the park, but it was everything he had been waiting for. A chance to prove that he was more than just a waiter, more than just someone who took orders and served drinks. This was the moment to show them who he really was. We'll start small, Sarah said, breaking his thoughts. There's a meeting this afternoon with a potential client. You'll be observing at first, but we want you to watch how we handle the conversation, how we negotiate. Pay attention to everything. The way we talk, the way we present ourselves. Marcus nodded, absorbing the challenge. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all of this, but he was going to try. This was his chance to step up, to do something bigger than what he had ever dreamed. After a few more minutes of discussing the specifics of the day, Sarah stood up. We'll get started soon. In the meantime, why don't you grab a seat, take a breather, and think about how you want to approach this. As Marcus sat down on the couch in the corner of the office, he felt a rush of emotions. Nervousness, excitement, but most of all, hope. He had no idea what was going to happen next. Marcus sat quietly in the corner of the office, his hands resting on his lap as he tried to calm his nerves. He could hear Sarah and the man discussing the upcoming meeting, going over details and strategies that sounded complicated, but also fascinating. He had never been in a room like this before, where every conversation seemed to hold so much importance. It felt like a different world from the one he had always known, but instead of feeling out of place, he felt something new, determination. A few minutes later, Sarah turned to him. All right, Marcus, it's time to go, she said firmly. Marcus stood up quickly, straightening his shirt. He followed Sarah and the man down the hallway and into a large conference room with a long glass table in the center. The chairs were sleek, the lighting was soft, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. It was the kind of room where big decisions were made, where people spoke with confidence and made deals that changed lives. He took a seat at the side of the room, just as Sarah had instructed. He wasn't here to speak, just to observe, but he knew this was his chance to learn. He watched as Sarah and the man took their seats at the table, their expressions calm and professional. A few moments later, the client arrived, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding the room instantly. Good afternoon, the client said as he shook hands with Sarah and the man. He glanced at Marcus for a second, but didn't say anything. Marcus felt a small pang of nervousness, but reminded himself that he was here for a reason. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. The conversation began, and Marcus listened carefully. Sarah spoke with confidence, her words smooth and precise. She knew exactly what to say, how to present ideas in a way that made them sound appealing. The man beside her added in key points, his tone warm but authoritative. It was a skillful exchange, a dance of words and ideas, and Marcus was fascinated. As the discussion continued, Marcus noticed something. The client seemed unsure about something. His body language shifted slightly, his eyes flickering with hesitation. Sarah and the man remained composed, but Marcus could tell they needed to address the client's concerns before he backed away from the deal. Without thinking, Marcus leaned forward slightly. His time as a waiter had taught him to read people, to notice the small details others missed. And right now, he could see what was bothering the client. He wasn't fully convinced that the deal would benefit him personally. Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should say something. This wasn't his place. He was just supposed to watch. But then he remembered what the man had told him. You have potential. Taking a deep breath, Marcus gathered his courage and spoke. Excuse me, sir, he said politely. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. The client raised an eyebrow, surprised that Marcus had spoken. Sarah and the man looked at him too, but neither stopped him. Marcus continued, his voice steady. I could be wrong. But it seems like you might be wondering how this deal benefits you directly, beyond the numbers. The client's eyes widened slightly. Marcus knew he had hit the right point. Sarah quickly picked up on it. That's a great question, actually, she said smoothly, jumping in to reinforce Marcus's point. Let me explain how this will directly support your personal goals as well. The conversation shifted. The client seemed more engaged now, listening carefully as Sarah restructured her approach. Marcus sat back, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had stepped in at the right moment, and it had made a difference. When the meeting ended, the client shook hands with Sarah and the man, looking much more satisfied than before. As he left the room, Sarah turned to Marcus, a small smile playing on her lips. That was a bold move, she said, and a smart one. The man nodded approvingly. You're a natural, Marcus. You saw something we almost missed, and that's exactly the kind of skill we need. Marcus felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he truly believed he belonged here. This wasn't just a lucky chance. This was his moment to prove himself. And he had done just that. As the days passed, Marcus felt like he was living a dream. The meeting had been a turning point, not just in his career, but in how he saw himself. Sarah and the man had praised his quick thinking, and that encouragement had lit a fire inside him. It was as though someone had given him the key to unlock a door he never even knew existed. But this was just the beginning. He wasn't going to stop here. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked harder than he ever had before. He spent hours learning, absorbing everything Sarah and the man taught him. He started to understand the art of negotiation, how to read a room, how to communicate with confidence. He even practiced his speaking skills, pushing himself to be more assertive, more engaging. The days weren't always easy. There were times when he stumbled, times when he felt like he wasn't moving fast enough, or when doubts crept into his mind. Was he really cut out for this? Was he just a waiter who had gotten lucky? But every time those thoughts tried to take root, he remembered the look of approval in Sarah's eyes, the man's quiet confidence in him, and the way they had trusted him in that meeting. Those memories were enough to keep him going, even when it felt hard. One afternoon, a few weeks into his new role, Sarah called him into her office. She had a serious look on her face, which immediately made Marcus nervous. Had he done something wrong? But when he walked in, she smiled at him, and the tension lifted. Marcus, she began, we've been impressed with your progress. I've been watching you closely, and I can see how much effort you've been putting in. You've picked up things faster than I expected. Marcus felt a rush of pride at her words. Thank you, Sarah. I'm doing my best. She nodded. It's paying off. We've got another client meeting coming up, and I want you to take the lead on it. Marcus blinked in surprise. Me? Lead it? Yes, she said firmly. You've shown you can handle the pressure, and I believe you're ready. I'll be there to support you, but this time, the responsibility is yours. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness flood through him. Leading the meeting was a huge step, but deep down, he knew he was ready. He had learned from the best, and now it was his turn to show what he could do. The day of the meeting arrived, and Marcus found himself standing in front of the conference room, taking a deep breath. His heart was racing, but his mind was clear. He had practiced everything. how to introduce the agenda, how to steer the conversation, and how to make sure everyone's concerns were addressed. As the client entered the room, Marcus stood tall, shaking hands with confidence. Sarah and the man were there too, but they took a step back, letting Marcus take charge. He felt the weight of the room, the eyes on him, but it didn't faze him. This was his moment. The meeting went smoothly. Marcus guided the conversation, addressing every concern the client raised, making suggestions, and showing a level of professionalism that surprised even himself. Every time he looked to Sarah or the man for feedback, they nodded approvingly. By the end of the meeting, the deal was signed, and the client left with a smile, satisfied with what they had discussed. As the door closed behind the client, Marcus exhaled deeply, his hand still trembling slightly. But the feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. He had done it. He had taken the lead and succeeded. Sarah and the man walked over to him, their smiles wide. "You did great," Sarah said, clapping him on the back. "I knew you had it in you." The man, always calm but with a spark of pride in his eyes, added, "This is just the beginning for you, Marcus. You've earned your place here." In that moment, Marcus realized just how far he had come, not just in his career, but in his own personal growth. He had gone from a waiter, unsure of his place in the world, to a leader in a field he had once thought was out of his reach. He had proven that with hard work, determination, and the right people believing in him, he could accomplish anything. As he walked out of the office that day, Marcus felt a sense of pride and confidence that he had never felt before. He had stepped into a new chapter of his life, one where he no longer had to hide behind the shadows of doubt. He was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time, he truly believed that he was capable of achieving anything he set his mind to. The future was his to shape, and he was no longer afraid to take on whatever challenges came his way.